Hey guys, welcome to Whispers of Charleston. My name is Savannah. Today we're going to talk about Carolina rice and kind of what the crops that made Charleston and what made the Low Country wealthy. So Carolina rice, indigo dye, and long staple cotton produced in the Low Country during the colonial and antebellum periods once made Charleston the wealthiest city in North America. So Carolina rice, questions concerning early rice cultivations in South Carolina included its introduction, country of origin, and who should be credited with its introduction remain a matter of speculation. Prize in the 19th Prize in the 19th century, global markets, Carolina gold rice probably replaced an earlier white rice grown before the American Revolution. Robert Allston of Chicora Wood Plantation in Georgetown notes that Carolina gold rice was planted by Colonel Mayham on Santee in 1685, and that a common white rice is the variety that constituted the earlier crops of the country. White rice may have been the seed from Madagascar given by Captain Thurber around 1685 to Dr. Henrv Woodward. Numerous other varieties were brought to the States, and Carolina gold may have resulted from crosses of those varieties, or it may have been introduced as a distinct variety, but by whom, when, and from where is not known. Rice initially was grown as an upland crop floating from rain-fed reservoirs formed by embaking freshwater swamps and artesian wells, as well as used for its earlier non-tidal cultivation. Historians have argued that slaves from the rice-growing region of West Africa made significant contributions to the earlier technology of rice culture in South Carolina, but the mid-15th century rice cultivation was widespread in West Africa, from Senegambama, if I missaid that, please correct me, to Lake Chad, and architectural methods were quite sophisticated in rice and slaves, ethnicity, and the slave trade in colonial South Carolina of 1991 by Daniel C. Littlefield states slaves from the Windward Coast and Senegambama Bima regions were better prepared for their New World experiences than has been community assumed, especially if they came to South Carolina. Rice in these African areas was cultivated not only by freemen but by slaves who were entirely subject to their master as well. Although the slavery in Africa was not racial, there was similarities such that when brought to the New World, their life in Africa bondage certainly prepared them for slavery. Littlefoot describes how rice cultivation in Africa resembled that which would emerge in the New World, including the use of sluice gates to control water flow in and out of rice fields. The plug trunks that came to be used in South Carolina's rice culture are clearly based on African sluice gates. Judith Carney in Black Rice of 2001 made a more extensive comparison of the methods of rice cultivation and emerged in the Atlantic states, which increasingly slave imports and cultivation methods practiced in West Africa. Clearly, methods of cultivation and processing West Africa rice and the early cultivation and processing systems that emerged in South Carolina are too similar to discount African influences. The vicinities of water supply from reservoirs for non-tidal rice cultivations. Too much during heavy rains, not enough in droughts, caused planters to seek a more constant supply of water, which they found in tidal sections of freshwater rivers that traversed the Low Country. Freshwater rivers were bordered by fringes of freshwater tidal marshes and were expanses of low-lying freshwater tidal swamps. As the salt tide rose in the coastal estuaries into which the freshwater rivers emptied, it caused the freshwater to back up and rise. When the salt tide embedded in the estuaries, it allowed the freshwater in the rivers to flow into the estuaries, and the water level in the rivers dropped. Twice a day, as far as 30-mile inland, the freshwater embedded and rose, draining, then flooding marshes and swamps. The shift to tidal cultivation began in the mid-1700s, and by the end of the American Revolution, most non-tidal fields were abandoned. To make tidal fields, earthen banks were constructed around freshwater tidal swamps and marshes, and gates were placed through the banks. Gates on the trunks allowed the fields to be flooded at high tide and drained at low tide, providing ideal growing conditions for rice. Marketing preparation included harvesting, threshing, and milling. Harvesting was done by hand with a sickle. Machines were never used to harvest Carolina rice. Threshing was initially done manually with a flail, Flail, and was afterwards windowed with a fainer basket, then later by a winnowing barn. In 1803, a manual thresher was used. Metal beaters was constructed by Calvin Emonis. Later, animal power, then water power, then steam power was applied to various beaters. The threshed the rice. Milling was initially done with a primitive motor and pestle, which removed the outer hull and an edible covering of the rice seed and bran. This method could not keep up with the increasing yield after tidal cultivation began, and a series of innovations helped planters mill rice more efficiently. Animal power than water power was applied to a series of motors and pestles. In 1787, Jonathan Lucas, a millwright from England, invented a mill run by water power that first used millstones to remove the rice's seeds whole, but retained the mortars and pestles to remove the bran. Around 1820, steam power replaced water power and was the power of choice until the end of the industry. Paddy rice entered the mill, and the clean rice was ready for market for deposited in a barrel at the end of the milling process, virtually untouched by mill workers. There is no distinctive date when rice cultivation ended in the Carolina and Georgia. A series of events contributed to the end, and not all plantations ended cultivation at the same time. Wealthier plantations were able to continue production longer than less financially endowed plantations. Three events, however, were prominent in ending rice cultivation on most plantations around 1911, the loss of slave labor after the Civil War, hurricanes of 1898, 1910, and 1911, and competition began around 1880 and from rice growing in Arkansas, Mississippi, and Louisiana. So that is it for the rice cultivation and kind of how rice was a big factor here in Charleston. And I'll kind of maybe go into indigo and kind of how indigo and indigo dye kind of started here in Charleston and how you get your blue jeans and all that good stuff. So I hope you'll enjoy, and thank you for listening. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. Give me a 5-star rating. That'd be humongo help. And I hope y'all are enjoying. All right. Have a good one. Bye, y'all.